Mark Lange, intrapreneur. What in God's name does that mean? Well, we're going to go through a definition of that with everyone when we get started. But welcome to Starting Different, my weekly webcasts. We are never starting over. We are always starting different. I always start with a snapshot of the morning. Mark, this was the snapshot I sent to you this morning.
Yep.
I just to make sure that you're still with me. So I think this was around 7:30 a.m. The universe won't allow the same. It only allows growth or decline, your choice. And I thought that was a great way to start this conversation. We know that entrepreneurs build businesses and do them on their own and employ other people. We know also that people who are really successful, whether entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs like Mark, they kind of know how to do things that the rest of us don't. They have secrets. Now, the thing about secrets is everything in the world is a secret until you know it. And the secret we're going to talk about today is the process of becoming, and how everyone in your organization, personally, professionally, as a team, as an entire company, can become better every day. So here's the bottom line up front. What if there was a button you could push in your brain to become better every single day? Well, you would hit that button, wouldn't you? So Mark, it's been a journey, you and I just want to set some context here with a little bit of math. Because everything you and I have focused on, and you and I have known each other for 21 years, we have been working together. Everything has been a process. You improve 1% a day, folks. In 70 days, you're twice as good. That's how the math works. So Mark has installed a process and a program within his company. His focus the last 2 years, and I'm going to have him walk you through it, is how, with an organization that has 6,000 employees globally, how do you create a program to connect your company's values to your employees' behaviors? And how do you make sure those are connected to the experience you want to create with your customers? So Mark, what do you remember 21 years ago? A little background on how we met. 21 years ago, what do you remember from us first meeting 21 years ago, brother?
So I remember, first of all, thanks for having me. I remember we met. I was managing a call center in Fogelsville, Pennsylvania, which was not far from where you lived at the time.
I think that was one of six. You also had one in San Diego, so let's not, it wasn't all hardship.
Yeah, we happened to be in Fogelsville that day. So you drove out, and we talked about one of the challenges that we were looking for some help with, and we went out to lunch in Fogelsville, Pennsylvania. There aren't a lot of options, so we went to Cracker Barrel. So that was our lunch, which I enjoyed, and I remember that.
The only time I've ever been in a Cracker Barrel. I don't think I am the only Italian who has ever been in a Cracker Barrel.
Yeah, they didn't have the spaghetti and meatballs that day, I don't think. But I remember that, and I remember, the concepts, some of which we'll talk about today, were eye-opening to me. I mean, you opened a new world to me, for sure.
Well, you and I have come a long way on this journey. So Mark, why don't you tell folks a little bit about your journey and how you got to be where you are? And Mark is an executive vice president with Arch Insurance. But Mark, I see in the center of the screen, I see the elegant Mark Lange that everyone at Arch knows, and I think that's your chief executive group behind you, laughing behind your back, which I shouldn't be surprised at, because
that's typical. Yeah, that's typical.
Yeah. But tell us about the picture on the top left. Tell us about.
Sure. So I've bookended my career of kind of corporate roles. Beginning of my career, corporate roles. Current role is a corporate role, and in the middle, I decided to try the entrepreneurial route that you talked about a little while ago. So I took a detour from insurance to start my own business, which was an indoor sports facility. That's the picture of it. That is about 9 years ago. We actually opened in the spring of 2011. And that's me right before we opened, sporting my very stylish orange T-shirt, which I no longer have. But it was really my you were going to talk about voice of the customer later. It was my role where I was connected to the customers really closely. Our customer base was largely children. They were playing basketball or other sports. And so I got to see every day, and I got to hear every day their voices, and I got to see on their faces their reaction to what we were doing. And kids don't hide their feelings. If they're not having a good time, you know it. If they are having a good time, you know it. And so that concept of voice of the customer really was something that resonated with me every day.
That's going to come up as one of the primary programs that you've rolled out at Arch. We're going to talk specifically in a moment about voice of the customer. So Mark, you had this corporate role where you were leading 500 or 600 folks, and by the way, in that role, those were that project, guys. We had a couple hundred reps across the country who were customer service reps, and Mark was tasked with growing them into sales professionals. So they were folks who, some of them, not only didn't want to sell and had never known how to sell, but when we told them they were going to be selling to customers over the phone, they threatened to quit. So we had two choices. We could create an invisible curriculum and kind of teach them how to sell without really telling them that's what we were doing, or we could create an intentional curriculum. And what we're going to talk about on this call, folks, is if you want to get better every day, you need to make the invisible visible. But Mark, I know that this word intentional is important to you, and it's important to the program as we're going to talk about. So what do you think about when you think about the word intentional?
Yeah, I think, when we rolled out what we rolled out, previously, or even what we've been doing at Arch, you hear from people, oh, I do that. But it's not done all the time. It's not done in an intentional way. In some cases, it's just innate. And to make something really work systematically across an organization, it needs to be intentional. We can't just assume that people know the best ways to do things and are going to do them that way every time. We can't just assume that people understand our values and are going to live by them all the time. We have to make it intentional. We have to put the systems and protocols in place to make sure that happens.
There were three things in the early part of our work together that you and I wanted to make visible for folks. And the first thing we wanted to make visible for them is, what is a process to follow? What do top performing sales and customer service people do? So the top right graphic you guys see actually came out of that program that Mark and I were involved with 20 years ago and became the basis of my first book, The One-Page Sales Coach. If we could put it on one page, and we did, we created a very simple process that back then we called the PSC model that made selling visual. Because people would say, oh, I do that sometimes. But the problem was they'd get off the phone and they'd say, oh, I could have said this. I should have said this. If I only would have said this. So our goal was to get rid of the coulda, shoulda, wouldas. The second thing we put in place, where you see those magnets there, that was making brain science and the shortcuts people use visible. But I think the most powerful thing we did, Mark, and I'd ask you to comment on it, is the coaching model we put in place. We put together a model that we refer to as the coaching path: prepare, ask, task, and hold, where now managers had a process that was visual to be coaching their reps every day. Can you talk a moment about the coaching component of that before we jump into the deeper stuff?
Yeah, I think that was the most powerful aspect of it, because it really reinforced and get back to the word intentional and making the invisible visible. First of all, it was bringing clarity to the role of supervisors, which is to coach and not do projects and run reports and do lots of other things, but is to really, help their team develop and perform at a high level, and being very intentional about what that process is, not just sticking a poster on the wall and saying, hey, you're now coaches, but providing them with a very specific, set of activities and processes that they go through to do that, as well as specific expectations of how often they do it and what it looks like.
So I want you guys thinking about three words as Mark goes through this. And if you want to take out a blank sheet of paper and write down the words what, why, and how. I've spent, for each one of these interviews, I spend about 30 hours preparing for the 30 minutes. This was the notes that I was preparing for my interview with one person, with Michael Alasso, a few weeks ago. But Mark and I have spent 30 years preparing for this 30 minutes with you guys. And everything we've done in that 30 years is about focusing on, what do top performers do? Why do those things work? And how can we help Mark's team calibrate them? So what, Alpha, what is the problem we're looking to solve? Why is that important? Delta, what's the difference in that individual's world, or what will be the difference for our teams? And how do we, Video, how do we make this visual for people? So by focusing on the what, why, and how, Mark and I were actually able to cut in half the amount of time it took a salesperson to get up to speed. Now that's significant when you're bringing on dozens and dozens and dozens of new performers. By creating cues, we're going to talk about this word, cues, visuals, you can then create routines that develop habits in your organization. So we're going to go through these three things, and none of it's new, folks. In anything you want to learn how to do, whether it's cook, whether it's sell, whether it's be great at LinkedIn, and I see Colleen was on the line and she's coming in the interview in a few years, whether you want to write a great book, that's Henry DeVries, who I have coming. No matter what you want to do, ask this question: what do the best already do at that? And if you can identify what they do and you can replicate their behaviors, you might have a semblance of their success. And none of this is new, Mark. I mean, I'm going to now drive into your stuff, but the book that I have laying on that table, you know, this whole process of behavioral design, this book was written in 1964 by T.J. Watson Jr. at IBM. He identified what were the basic things that IBMers should believe in. Who are they going to be? Now, once that was done, people knew how to act within IBM. So the process begins that way. Now let's talk about the process of becoming great as an intrapreneur. So I just want to give you guys a sense of what Mark does as an intrapreneur. He's an entrepreneur within a corporation, given freedom, financial support to create products, services, systems. But I really want you to know, if you want to be successful, and so many of you on this call may not be owners of your own business, there's three amazing little books that actually came out the year, Mark, you and I met. And I have watched you develop into the success you are. And you have focused on, in my opinion, these three things. The first thing, folks, Mark has created a brand around himself. So Mark, you have a trademark phrase. And you've been saying it for 20 years. Everyone at Arch knows that you say it. What's your what do you say before we start anything?
This is going to be fun.
I got to tell you, folks, we had 160 people register, and a quarter of them were Arch employees. You know why? Because they know that when Mark Lange's involved, it's going to be fun and it's going to be excellent. So first thing I want you guys to know, you're all your own brand. Whether you have been consciously creating it or not, you are your own brand. Number two, what Mark is a master at is projects. Every project that I've been in, so Mark said, Dean, I don't have a book to talk about. I said, Mark, I got 7 books on my shelf that are your books. He has mastery around the craft of designing, implementing, and holding people accountable to the projects he rolls out. And the third thing Mark does is he considers himself a business that has customers. Yeah, I know he had that basketball business, but he's got a lot more customers now, and he considers himself a professional service firm as an individual. So, Mark, 2 books that I feel you've written in the last 2 years. The first is called The Voice of the Customer. That was a specific project I'd like you to talk about first, and then we're going to talk about the second one, the Arch experience. So tell us about Voice of the Customer.
Yeah, so you know, starting with the the alpha, as you talked about it a minute ago, Dean. You know, I think the challenge that we had was, you know, do we really know ourselves well? Are we honest with ourselves as a company about who we are and who our company or who our customers think that we are? And at the same time, you know, what we thought about ourselves didn't necessarily sync up completely with our results and how we did with particular customers. And so there was a, you know, kind of an inconsistency there that we wanted to understand. And so, you know, we undertook a number of different ways of getting feedback, you know, from our customers. And I think what it did was it provided us clarity around what they thought of us and what they wanted from us. And I think, you know, the other thing that was really, I think, meaningful in that, and you helped us, you know, think through this is, you know, our customers aren't organizations. Our customers are people within organizations that have brains, that have needs, that have concerns that have risks that they're dealing with. And so the more we understand that and how that translates into what they need and want from us, the better we're able to respond to it.
Well, I think Michael Alasso, with his focus on helping professional CEOs become themselves on their best, I think that's brilliant. And I think the challenge of companies coming up with a behavioral design program, because they want to think about who they can be on their best day. And what I learned from you is there's a more important question we should be asking. Because I can remember another speaker making fun of the phrase voice of the customer. And he didn't get it. He didn't get it, Mark. What you knew. So Mark and I were immersed in a wonderful book, and we'll tell you about this book in a minute. But the author of the book said you have two choices in creating a change manager, a behavior, a new culture in your company. Number one, focus on your values and build behaviors around those values. Or number two, identify your behaviors and just start doing them. Well, Mark took a third approach, which blew me away, which was this question. Why don't we focus on what our customers want on their best day with us? Not necessarily who are we on our best day. So we undertook a process of asking Mark's customers a series of questions, and really in three categories. What's the problem that's solved? How are we different from others? And how would you describe us to someone who hasn't seen us? So Mark, the brain science, these two main concepts: psychological safety, folks. Right. What do people get from you, and are they at risk? And the concept of reducing friction. How do you make it easy? So Mark, I've shown you this magic mirror I've created. Yeah. Can you talk about what this means to you and kind of what we heard from your customers?
Yeah, it helped. Obviously perception is reality. And so what we heard from our customers was like looking in that mirror. And, they played back to us some themes that weren't exactly what we thought about ourselves, but they also played back some themes that aligned with what we thought about ourselves, but what we weren't thinking about was what this meant to them. And so we may talk about our organizational structure, for example, as a competitive advantage. Our customers didn't care about that. They cared about how quickly we responded to them and how quickly we made a decision. That impacted them. So it helped us understand more about what was important to them and what we did that impacted them. Again, this isn't like crazy sophisticated as much as it was really, I think, using that mirror in a way that helped us help them.
I know you're being humble, but I have to tell you, it is brain science, folks. Okay, just if you have a piece of paper, draw this little chart. It's 4 quadrants, because where you want to be is quadrant 1 for your customers. And I want you guys to think about the people you serve and work with. I want you to think about ranking them in your own mirror as well. The 2 questions I ask, first of all, is there something in this for that customer? What are they getting? And what am I getting? That's high gain or low gain. And then, is it easy or hard for me to work with them? Mark, you have, from the day I met you, been a quadrant 1 client for me. And I want you to see me as a quadrant 1 vendor or resource to you. I want it to be easy. I want it to be fun. And I want you to get stuff. I got to tell you, there's people who are in quadrant 4, and you met Sarah here before we started this call. Yep. Quadrant 4 is the no dean privileges quadrant.
Right.
Okay. Right. If you're low gain and high pain, you're gone. And your customers feel the same way about you guys. So think about starting with the voice of your customer in anything you guys do. All right, Mark, tell us about the next project. Once you had your arms around and you created a model so that you could make it visual, you created an acronym that people could remember about the basic things your clients were looking for from Arch, and we went through a process of design and you included your team. Talk to me about this, the Arch experience. What is the project? What does it mean to you? Yep. What do you think is the problem it solves?
Yeah, so the problem we were trying to address was, our company is a compilation of 15 different businesses, specialty insurance businesses, but different lines of business, different distribution. They do, it's very autonomous businesses. And so as we thought about how do we differentiate in a consistent way across our organization in the marketplace, and how do we communicate that, we were having a hard time finding, common threads. But when we went through this voice of the customer, it became really clear to us that the common thread is our people, it's our culture, it's our values, and the Arch experience really is just an outgrowth of that, and making that, to your point earlier, Dean, intentional, and really leveraging that in a much more clear and obvious way.
It's what IBM was trying to do during that huge growth mode. I mean, in the 4 years between when this book was written, A Business and Its Beliefs, and when I was born, and my dad was an IBMer in 1968, IBM doubled its size. And the same thing, all different kinds of functional areas, Mark. Imagine a company that grew from 125,000 to 250,000 people in 4 years. Right? You want people to be behaving in a certain way. And by the way, what we're talking about, folks, is nothing new. We can go back to Ben Franklin, and we can find a behavioral design program that he put in place in the 1700s. I'm going to show it to you guys in a minute. Of course, there's a bunch of books. These are some of the best, I believe, if you want to figure out how you change your culture, how you change your personal habits and behavior, all the way up to BJ Fogg, who's the head of the Stanford Behavioral Design Lab. But the companies that really do this well, and Mark, one of them that we took a look at was Ritz-Carlton, have said there are things we want our people to do every day to create a certain experience for our customers. And every Ritz-Carlton is different. And I just did the math with Mark as we were talking. I've stayed at 15 of them. I love the hotels so much, I buy hats. But by the way, Ritz-Carlton is different than other places. And I didn't take the label off this one yet, but here's my daughter's happy place. It's Halekulani, which is a single hotel out in Hawaii, which is its own unique thing, and they act in a certain way there. And what we know is if we wanted every employee at Arch to be putting that hat on and be behaving and achieving certain things for clients, we need to focus on what, why, and how to implement this. And every day was a process. Now, Mark, something you said jumped out at me because we talk about how people think this stuff is little stuff, and they think they already know this stuff, and they might not recognize the power of focusing on individual behaviors and individual values. So in this process, you identified 14, Mark?
Right, 14.
Why don't you walk people through just tactically, because the process as you're rolling out is you're focusing on one behavior every single week, correct?
Right.
You have a specific focus, and I'm going to show you guys how Ben Franklin was doing this back in the 1700s. But what's the behavior you're focusing on this current week?
So this week is right there in the middle of your screen, actually. Be fanatical about responsiveness.
So it's a behavior that we're now being specific about what we want people to do. And it relates back to that value, which is we work hard and smart. That's a core value at Arch. But more importantly, Mark, it relates back to what you said your customers found most important to you.
Right. Yeah. They want us to get to quick decisions. Your point earlier about, reducing friction. The more we can get back to them with decisions quickly, the less friction that they're encountering, and the better they can serve their customers.
So we've identified 14 of these. I believe at Ritz-Carlton, they identified 12, or they currently have 12. And with the folks at Ritz-Carlton that I speak to, talk to us about how you're rolling these out. What are the sorts of visual cues you're creating for people, and what are the routines around them? Without giving away any trade secrets, but how is this rolling out within Arch? And I know the project is just now starting to roll out among all the employees. Right.
So as you said, we have one behavior per week of the 14, and then we'll start again. Week 15 goes back to behavior number 1. We've got people that are each week in charge of promoting this and really building the focus amongst the group that they're part of. For that week, we have systems in place to enable us to recognize our colleagues when we observe them demonstrating that behavior. And we also have ways of that being promoted internally within the organization more broadly. So and there's a number of visual cues like the ones you showed on the screen there, Dean. So we've had to migrate it from visual cues, meaning stuff in offices, to virtual visual cues. We've been forced to do that over the last couple of months, but we've been able to do that and maintain the momentum that we had prior.
Listen, not every company has 6,000 employees, and I just make the point when I speak to companies that are not as large as you, that for less than $200 or right around $200, they could create the same process. And I can talk to you guys about how you can do this simply with a flip chart and focusing on a behavior a week. But what I want you to know is in the 1700s, Ben Franklin wanted to become better. When he was a young man, he made a list of 13 behaviors. 13, Mark, 13, not 21, not 35. Why did Ben Franklin pick 13, Mark?
Well, he was good at math, right? And he figured out if he had 13 that he could do each one of those 4 times over the course of the year. 52 weeks divided by 4. 13.
52 weeks divided by 4. And guess what Ben Franklin did, folks? He printed out a card for himself each week to focus on the behavior that he wanted to improve. And he actually tracked himself in that process. 13 behaviors tracked weekly. Ben Franklin was doing it in 1760. Ritz-Carlton, one of the most successful hospitality companies in the world, rolled it out. Currently 35,000 employees. They focus on 12 behaviors, again, tied to their values. On week 13, they start on number 1 again. So whether it's Ritz-Carlton, whether it's various Chris Hayes' group within Vistage, whether it's the American Astrological Society, Mark, they have a way card. And by the way, it is rocket science for those guys. So let's talk about 2 things that are brain science and 2 things you need to consider in your programs. First of all, the brain sparks at any beginning and end. So you have natural beginnings and ends to remind yourself of things. The beginning of a day, the end of a day. The beginning of a week, the end of the week. And that's how you guys are rolling it out. Beginning of week, end of week, correct, Mark?
Right, correct, yes.
Ben Franklin did the same thing. He focused each quarter on 13 things, 1 per week, 13 weeks in each quarter. But think about the natural beginnings and end you have, because the brain looks for shortcuts. Now I'm going to call them forcing mechanisms. I want you guys to think about this. If you want to get forward motion in building new habits, building new behaviors, you have to create a forcing mechanism. You know, Mark, I have a forcing mechanism here in Florida, which is 8 a.m. on Mondays. Every other week, the cleaning crew arrives, which means that 6 a.m. on Monday, what am I doing, Mark?
Cleaning.
Yeah, I'm organizing the house. I'm getting stuff. And guess what? If I don't have that cleaning crew scheduled at 8 a.m., guess when I would clean my house, Mark?
Never.
I would never clean my house. So remember, the brain looks around you all the time, looks for stimuli, and the brain looks for shortcuts. Those shortcuts, folks, are called cognitive biases. And there's a cost when your brain makes a decision. Brain scientists call this cognitive cost. Your brain is looking to save energy. So if I want to create shortcuts for myself, for example, during COVID, I want to be drinking more water because without water, I get anxious. I want to drink 8-ounce glasses a day. I have a forcing mechanism. This glass, that table that you see with 8 stones that I move over to the right once I drink a glass of water. Now, I've created a space here in my house for that to happen. I've created a space. Mark, that's what I believe you guys have done with your program. You've created a space for success to happen. So folks, good news and bad news. Good news is everyone on this call and all of your team has a brain. The bad news is it wasn't born with a user manual, but I do see things in these books we've read, Mark. I see things. I see that there are cues we can put in place, triggers, shortcuts, patterns. So the brain responds to stimuli. Mark, you have taken stimuli and turned them into cues for your team, visual stimuli, and you have built routines around them that allow them to improve. Now, I know with the first organization, we wanted we wanted to help people sell more effectively, create the right experience. We were doing that because we wanted to be a more profitable organization, and the how was the way we were rolling it out with coaching, etc. Mark, you focused on 2 projects in the last 2 years. You want to tell us about, because I know you got another one on the burner, before we close up here, because we're almost at the 30-minute mark, what's the project you have on the burner?
Yeah, without giving away too much, I would say as we talk about, our brand and how we differentiate ourselves in the marketplace, it's about experience, and ultimately that's, delivered by our people. So I think, we'll see a lot about, our brand is really related to the people within our company.
So he very strategically avoided answering my question, which is okay, Mark. It's okay. It's something to do with the brand.
It was actually on purpose. Yeah.
Here's what I know about Mark. Everything he focuses on with his teams is about helping them become better. And every single day he does that is a work in progress. So that's the series that we've been focused on, folks. Every day is a chance for you to start different. I've had brain scientists on, I've had Hollywood actors on, I had an F-15, F-22 fighter pilot on, and now I had my dear friend Mark Lange on. This coming week, next week, I have my dear friend Henry DeVries on to help you understand why it's important to put together a book. I'm going to talk to Mark about his book. I'm going to talk to Steve Jalcutt again at Arch about his book. There's so many people within Arch who I believe have a book in them. Mark, are you okay with people reaching out if they want to contact you?
Absolutely.
So you're on LinkedIn. It's M. Lange at Arch Insurance. Mark, anything we left out or anything you'd like to add before I put up my closing slide?
Just thanks for having me. And every time we talk, I learn something. So I appreciate that.
Well, hopefully that's a good thing. I told Mark that half of what I know, he and I learned together, so we can't play Trivial Pursuit on the same team because we only know the same answers. So here's my final slide. We are all constantly in the state of becoming. Statue, self-made man, artist has become a friend of mine, Bobby Carlisle. She created a work of art, a man building himself out of a block of granite. I see it differently now. I see him as revealing himself. He is in the process of becoming. So this time we're in, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was what we made of it. We are always in the process of starting different. Mark, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm going to end the phone call in three. Thank you, brother. In 3, 2, and